Welcome to the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. This lecture is intended for students enrolled in the Academy's Classical Reasoning 1 course. If you're not enrolled and would like to join us for self-paced studies, visit classicalliberalarts.com. My name is William Michael. I'm the Academy Headmaster, and I'll be leading this study of Chapter 2 of Porphyry's Introduction. We're studying the introduction by Porphyry, who was a 3rd century philosopher who lived from approximately 234 to 305 AD. He himself was a Platonist, but he wrote this introduction to prepare students for the accurate study of Aristotle's categories. It's called the Introduction. In Greek, it's Isagoge, so sometimes you'll see that name associated with the book. And in this introduction, what he does is identify 5 important concepts that need to be understood in order to rightly understand the categories of Aristotle. These are called the 5 predicables, and they are genus, species, difference, property or peculiarity, and accident. These are the basic ways we can speak about any subject, and they're especially important in logical reasoning. We're going to study them all in detail, so I won't spend any time explaining them at this point. It's just important to understand the purpose of this book to prepare us for the study of Aristotle's categories by understanding 5 concepts, the 5 predicables: genus, species, difference, peculiarity, and accident, before we begin Aristotle's Organon, the first book of which is the Categories. In this second chapter, we're going to focus on the first 2 of the predicables, genus and species, and we're going to lay the foundation for understanding how we classify and organize our knowledge of reality. How do human ideas and terms and definitions work? This is really important stuff, very, very practical. It may seem philosophical and abstract at first, but as we discuss it and understand it more and more, it really creates in us a way of thinking that is extremely helpful, extremely practical. And as I said in the first lecture, I always tell my students that this study, the study of Porphyry's Introduction, is what initiates a student into the world of learned people, classically speaking. So as we get into this study, I'll do my best to make sure to emphasize the practical benefits of these concepts. So in the second chapter, again, we're going to study the first 2 predicables, genus and species. Before we get started, let's take some time to commit our study to the Lord and ask for His blessing and direction. Let us pray. Lord our God, in your wisdom and love, you surround us with the mysteries of the universe. Send your Spirit upon us and fill us with your wisdom and blessings. Grant that we may devote ourselves to our studies and draw ever closer to you, the source of all knowledge. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. This is a lengthy reading, chapter 2, and I'll provide a separate recorded reading for the chapter if you'd like to listen along. But what I would recommend at this point is that if you haven't read the chapter yet, the first step of studying for mastery is to simply read the content of the lesson, just from beginning to end, no notes, no attempt to understand anything yet or study, just simply read the content from beginning to end to become familiar with what we're going to study. So if you haven't done that yet, if you haven't yet made your first reading of the lesson text, I recommend you stop the lecture and take some time to go and do that. And then when you're finished, come and pick up where you left off. If you have already read the chapter, then we can move on to the division of the chapter, which I'd like to talk about next. The purpose of this lesson, just to get a bird's eye view, the purpose of this lesson is stated by Porphyry himself at the beginning of the chapter. He says, "It seems that neither genus nor species is simply denominated." So he presents a problem at the beginning of this chapter. Remember, we're studying these 5 predicables because Porphyry is arguing that not understanding these 5 concepts clearly leads to confusion and possibly error in the study of Aristotle's logic. And here he presents one of the first problems. Genus and species are not simply denominated. That is, these names, genus and species, if we go through the history of philosophy, we will find these words, these names used in all different places, in all different contexts. But most importantly, we'll find them used in all different ways. So they are not simply denominated. That means they are not always used with the same meaning. The word genus can be used in one place and have one meaning. Then it's used in another place and it's got a different meaning. The same is true with species. And then when we come to Aristotle, if we've got all of these different meanings bouncing around in our heads and we're not sure what Aristotle means by these terms, that becomes a source of confusion or false interpretation. So this is the problem, and the purpose of this chapter, Porphyry says, is to sort this out. We want to address this problem of genus and species being terms that have many different uses. We want to establish the proper use of these terms for the study of Aristotle's categories. And I'm going to recommend dividing this second chapter into 6 significant parts. So we'll divide this chapter into 6 significant parts. If you're studying on the Academy website, reading the text in the Academy library online, these parts will already be marked out and labeled in the text. But if you're not, if you're using a printed copy or you've found a copy of Taylor somewhere else, on archive.org or Google Books, I'll tell you where we're going to divide this chapter into its parts. The first part, beginning at the beginning of the chapter, Porphyry gives us 3 different meanings of the term genus. So part 1 are the 3 different meanings of genus, and that begins right from the start of the chapter. It seems that neither genus nor species is simply denominated. The second part begins when Porphyry says, which also describing. If you find that spot in the chapter, and we'll call this second part the philosophical definition of genus, the definition of genus that we are interested in for the study of Aristotle's categories, the philosophical definition of genus. That's part 2. The third part begins where Porphyry says, species, however, he changes the subject and moves from genus to species. He says, species, however, is predicated. That's where the third part begins, and we'll call this third part the meanings and definition of species. The fourth part begins where Porphyry says, what we have said, however, will be evident. And this fourth part, we're going to label it as the hierarchy of genera and species. And just for the record, genera is the plural form of genus, so don't get confused by that. Genus and genera, same word. Genus is singular, genera is plural. So part 4, the hierarchy of genera and species, a very important section. And then lastly, or not lastly, the 5th part begins at with respect to genus and species. With respect to genus and species. And we'll call this 5th part the logic of predication. The logic of predication. And then lastly, the 6th part is the conclusion, where he says, concerning genus and species, therefore, we have shown what they are. So the 6th part is the conclusion. That may be a single sentence at the end, actually. So 6 parts. Just to review them real quick, the 3 meanings of genus, part 1. The philosophical definition of genus, part 2. The meanings and definition of species, part 3. The hierarchy of genera and species, part 4. The logic of predication, part 5. And then the conclusion of chapter 2. It's a lengthy chapter. It's actually got 2 different subjects included in it. It deals with both genus and species. That's why it's long. It also deals with 2 other topics in parts 4 and 5. So it's a lengthy chapter, pretty dense and difficult for a student to work through on his own. Many students get to this chapter and jump ship. It's difficult to wrap your head around, but you'll see as we go through it, the message is very clear, and I'm confident that by the end of this lecture, after you go back and study the text for yourself, you won't have a problem with chapter 2 of Porphyry's introduction. So having divided the lesson text, let's go ahead and get to the study of its meaning with our interpretation. So to begin part 1, again, the 3 meanings of genus, we're obviously going to go through these 3 different meanings. Porphyry begins the chapter saying, it seems that neither genus nor species is simply denominated. And I've already talked about this a little bit, but let's make sure the meaning of this opening sentence is clear. Porphyry begins by telling us that these words, genus and species, are not used in one way. They don't have a simple use. And this is important because in philosophy, especially in reasoning, we have to be very careful about the meanings of the words that we use. Again, especially in reasoning, because syllogisms and arguments are built with words. And if the words don't mean the same thing, it can appear that we have a good syllogism or argument, but in fact it's invalid because the meanings of the words are not the same. They change in the midst of our argument. So we have to make sure we always define terms clearly, and we have to hold ourselves and others accountable to those meanings. The meanings of words can't change. If they do change, that's called equivocation, and it's a logical fallacy. So we've got to make sure we use a proper definition for a term. We make it clear what we mean by the terms we use, and then we've got to stick to those meanings every time we use those words, unless we clarify that we are, for some reason, changing the meaning. So when we use a word like genus, we might mean different things in different situations. There's no problem with that. Just like the word bank can mean the side of a river bank, or a place where money is kept. We can use a word where the name is the same and there are different meanings in different contexts, but when we're discussing a particular idea, we have to make sure that that idea, the essence of the subject we're talking about, it doesn't change. It stays the same. So that's a concern. That's a problem that Porphyry wants to fix for us, because this is a source of the trouble in reading Aristotle. So he starts with a first meaning of genus. The first meaning. He says, for a collection of certain things, subsisting in a certain respect with reference to one thing, and to each other is called a genus. And I'll repeat that. Remember, this is the first meaning of genus. A collection of certain things that subsist or exists in a certain respect with reference to one thing. That is, all of the things in this collection have a certain relation to something in common and to each other. That collection of things is called a genus. This is the first meaning of genus. He says the first meaning of genus comes from family relationships. When we talk about the genus of the Heraclidae, the word Heraclidae is just the genitive form of the sons of Heracles. Like in the Bible, when we talk about the sons of Israel or the sons of Abraham, Heraclidae means the sons of Heracles, the people who are descended from Heracles or Hercules. Think of this like a family tree. All the people who can trace their family line back to one common ancestor belong to that genus or family group. Porphyry uses the example of Heracles and his descendants to show how this works. The meaning of genus in this sense is based on relationships and shared ancestry. That's one possible meaning, one way that the word genus is used. He then goes on to discuss the second meaning of genus. He says, after another manner, here's the second meaning, after another manner also, the principle of the generation of everyone is again denominated genus. The principle of generation of everyone is again, in a different way, denominated or named genus. So this second meaning of genus refers to the source or origin of someone's birth. This can mean either the father who generated you or the place where you were born. So when we say, for example, Orestes derived his genus from Tantalus, we mean that Tantalus was his ancestor. When we say that Pindar was a Theban, we identify the genus to which he belongs. He is a citizen of Thebes. We mean he came from the city of Thebes. This is like saying that someone is an American or a New Yorker. Their place of origin, the place from which, or the source of their birth or origin, becomes part of how we identify them, and this is referred to as their genus. That's the second way. Porphyry says again, after another manner, this is the third way, genus is denominated that to which species is subjected. The third meaning is that genus is that to which species is subjected. This third meaning, this is important. The third meaning here is the philosophical one. This is the one that we're interested in. The third meaning is the one that Porphyry is going to focus on in this introduction. This is the one we need to know to rightly read and understand Aristotle's categories. Genus, in this third sense, means a general category of things that contains more specific types within it. And pay attention to these words. The word general category, general, comes from genus. And when I said specific types, specific comes from species. So listen to that again. Genus refers to a general category. Genus refers to a general category or a broader category that contains more specific types, that is, species, within it. Genus is that to which species is subjected. A genus means a general category that contains specific types within it. This is like saying that animal is a genus. Think of it as a category or a class of things. Animal is a genus, and within the genus animal are specific types or subgroups within the genus. We can divide animal into all different kinds of groups. Species could be dog, cat, horse, and so on. The important thing to understand is animal is the name for the larger class, the genus, and it contains a number of different smaller classes known as species. This philosophical meaning is similar to the family meaning because both involve one thing being the source or container of many other things. But it's important to understand clearly this third philosophical meaning of the term genus. Porphyry goes on to say, since, therefore, genus is denominated in a threefold manner, and this word denominated, don't let that distract you, it just means named. Genus is named in a threefold manner. The third manner, the third way, is that which is considered by philosophers. So Porphyry makes it clear that philosophers, which is what we are in the study of rational philosophy, philosophers are interested in the third meaning. The first two meanings are useful, but the philosophical meaning helps us to understand how our minds organize knowledge about reality. The third meaning is the meaning that's needed in the study of rational philosophy, the study of the order of our minds. So that's the first part of the lesson, the three meanings of the term genus and which of them is the one that interests us. Now in part 2, he goes into further detail talking about the philosophical definition of genus, this third meaning. He says, which also describing, they explain, when they say that genus is that which is predicated of many things, that means it's a class. It's predicated of many things. It's predicated of everything that belongs to it as a group. Genus is that which is predicated of many things which differ in species in answer to the question, what a thing is. So here we have a very detailed and clear definition of genus as we're going to use it when we study Aristotle's category. And you've got to get all three parts of this definition. And we'll make sure we do this in the memory work at the end of this lecture. Genus is, first of all, that which is predicated of many things. Secondly, it's predicated of many things differing in species. And thirdly, it answers the question, what a thing is, or what is this? And again, we're going to get into all the details of this, so don't worry too much about understanding it completely at this point. What I want you to see is that Porphyry is establishing very clearly a definition of the term genus for us to use in our philosophy studies. Genus is that which is predicated of many things, differing in species, in answer to the question, what is this, or what a thing is? So Porphyry gives us a precise philosophical definition. A genus is something that we can say about many different species when we want to answer the question, what is this thing? For example, let's say there's a dog on the lawn in front of us, and someone points at the dog and says, what is that? What is that? That's the question. What is this thing? What is that? And someone says, It is an animal. That is an animal. The answer to the question, animal, is a genus. Why is it a genus? Well, first of all, we saw it answers the question, what is this? That's the first thing. But also, we can answer animal to a number of different species. So, for example, if on another day there was a cat on the lawn and someone said, what is that? We could answer the question again with the same answer and say, it's an animal. So, animal is used in answer to the question, what is that? And it can be used for different species, different groups within itself. So there are two parts of the definition. Animal can be used to answer the question, what is this? And it can be spoken of different species. It tells us what kind of thing they fundamentally are. It tells us what their essence is. It addresses their essence. What is that? It's an animal. That's the genus to which it belongs. And just so you know, that's where definitions begin. We begin a true definition by identifying the genus of a thing. And then we go on to also mention its difference, which we'll study later. Porphyry goes on and says, for of things which are predicated, some are predicated of one thing only, as individuals. Now, just to be clear, this word predicated shouldn't confuse us. To predicate is simply to assert something about a subject. When we study grammar, especially elementary English grammar, we learn about subjects and predicates. And very simply, when we ask, well, what is a subject or what is a predicate? We say a subject is that about which we assert something. What we're talking about, that's the subject. And the predicate is what we assert about the subject. What we say about the subject is a predicate. So if I say, what is that? The subject is a dog. If I say the dog is an animal, is the predicate. And so I'm predicating animal of dog. That you see how the philosophical language or the logical language works. What am I predicating? I am predicating animal of the subject dog. So to go back to what Porphyry says, for things which are predicated, some are predicated of one thing only, such as individuals. Porphyry explains how genus as one kind of predicable, one way of predicating about something. He explains how genus differs from other ways of speaking about things. Some words can only be said about one particular thing. That is, they name not classes, but they name individuals. For example, the proper name Socrates can only refer to one specific person. A person's proper name, the reason why it's called a proper name is because it's proper to one person. It names an individual. Other words, however, can be said of many things because they are the names of classes. In English grammar, we call these common nouns, names of classes of things, names that are common to all the members or classes within a larger class. So there are two different ways that we're learning so far, two different ways that we can speak of a subject. We can speak of a subject as an individual. We can give a predicate that names something that can only be said of the individual, like a proper name. We can also name or predicate the genus of the subject. These classes of things, which genus is one of them, these are the predicables. So genera, species, differences, peculiarities, and accidents, all of these refer to classes, common things. And so there's a fundamental difference. If we want to divide predicables into two groups, one group would be things predicated of only individuals, and the other broad group would be things predicated of many things, such as genera or species, differences, properties, accidents, as we'll see. To understand this, think about how we use language. When I say Socrates, I'm pointing to one specific person. If I point to a man and someone says, "What is that?" I could say, "Oh, that's Socrates." I'm naming an individual. Someone else could point to the same thing, the same person, and say, "What is that?" And I could say, "That's an animal." I can predicate of the same subject in a different way. I'm using a word in the second predicate that applies to many different things. I can point to a dog and say that's an animal. I can point to a cow, say that's an animal. Point to another man, say that's an animal. A bird, that's an animal. Socrates names one thing, names an individual. Animal names many things, anything that belongs to the class or genus animal. Porphyry gives us examples. Animal is a genus. Man is a species. So if someone, again, pointed to a man and said, "What is that?" I could say, "That is a man." Man is a class. It's common to many individuals. But it is also contained as a subcategory of animal, which is genus. Animal names the larger class. Man is a smaller class within the class animal. I could answer in other ways as well. I could say rational. When I say rational, I answer the question with a different kind of predicate, a difference, because animal is the genus, and in the genus animal, there are two different kinds of animals. There are rational animals and irrational animals. So if someone pointed to the man and said, "What is that?" I could say it's Socrates, that's naming an individual. I could say it's an animal, that would be a genus. I could say it's a man, that identifies the species. I could also say it's a rational animal. I can name the genus animal and a difference, rational. That's actually what a definition is, the genus with the difference. I could say that's a rational animal, which is the same thing as saying that's man, because rational animal is the definition of the species man. I could also say that is an animal which is able to laugh. And if I use able to laugh, I would predicate of the subject in a different way. I would predicate with a peculiarity, something that is true only of man. But it's not the difference that establishes the species. So difference and peculiarity are similar, but there's an important difference between them. Difference is what makes a species. Peculiarity identifies something unique about a species, but is not responsible for establishing the species. It doesn't address the essence of the species. And lastly, I could say something like, what is that? I could say that is a sitting man. I could say sitting. And sitting is a different kind of predicate. And what's unique about sitting is it could be true of the subject at one time and not true of the subject at a different time. It's an accident. It's not essential to the subject, it's accidental. It can be true of the subject at one time, not be true at another time. Whether it's true or not has no effect on the essence of that subject. So we see that there are actually 6 different ways that we can predicate about a subject. We can speak of an individual, We can speak of a genus, of the difference, of a species, of a peculiarity, and of an accident. 5 different ways we can speak of a subject. That's what we mean by the 5 predicables. All right? Porphyry goes on and says, genera, again, that's plural for genus, genera differ from things which are predicated of one thing only in this: they are predicated of many things. So we can distinguish, and this is what we're going to do in Porphyry's introduction here. The way that he's going to clarify for us the differences of these predicables is he's going to tell us what they are, first of all, give us a definition, which is great. But even more helpfully, he's going to explain what they have in common, how they're like one another, and how they differ. That helps us to really pinpoint what each of these things is, what each of these predicables is. We'll know the definition. We'll know how it's like other predicables, but we'll also know how it differs from those other predicables. So what he's doing here, when he says genera differ from things that are predicated of only one thing in this, that they are predicated of many things, he says there is something in common between a genus, which is predicated of a class of things, and a predicate that refers only to an individual. They have something in common. They're both predicates. So they have that in common. But here's what they differ in. A genus is predicated of many things, and by many it just means more than one. Whereas a predicate that refers to an individual names only one thing or refers to only one thing. So a genus, predicates of many things, whereas an individual predicate refers to only one thing. Now that seems obvious, but it's important. Genera are different from individual names because genera can be applied to many things, while individual names apply to only one thing. The example of an individual we saw was the name, the proper name, Socrates. Important to note that in English, we capitalize proper names. Names that identify individual things, we tend to mark with a capital letter. And as we go through this study, I challenge you to think about that and ask the question, why do we do that? Why do we use capital letters for proper names? See if you can figure that out as we study this. So going on, Porphyry says, genera differ from those which are predicated of many things, and in the first place from species. So we said how a genus is like all of the other predicables because they are all different ways of predicating of subjects. Now we're looking at how they differ. We looked at how genus differs from individual things. Now we're going to look at how genus differs from all of the other predicables because they have this in common. They are all predicated of many things. They differ from those other kinds of predicates, those other predicables which are predicated of many things. That's the 5 predicables. And in the first place, we're going to consider how genus differs from species. So here is where we learn the crucial distinction between genus and species. What exactly are these? Both of them can be said of many different things, but they differ in an important way. A species is said about many individuals, and again, many means more than one in this context. A species can be said about many individuals that are the same kind of thing, so they belong in the same class. They differ only in number, and that's a little confusing when you first read it. What does it mean they differ in number? It means they're simply 2 different things. Each of them is one. They're 2 different things. They belong to the same class, but they differ only in number. And what that really means, as we're going to see, is they don't divide further into other classes. It's sort of the final division that he's talking about here. So a genus can be spoken of many things, but the things that genus can be spoken of can divide into smaller groups. Species can be spoken of more than one thing, but they don't divide into smaller groups. They're simply a collection of individuals. So, for example, animal is a genus. It can divide into man and beast. It can divide into two different species. But I can say that Socrates is a man, and man can be said of many different individuals, but man does not divide into any smaller classes. It only contains individuals. That's what makes it a species. Man can be said about Socrates, can be said about Plato, can be said about Aristotle. They're all men, but they are different individuals. They differ only in number. Each is a different one. A genus, on the other hand, is said about many species, but they are species that can differ in kinds. So animal, like I said, could be used to name a man, an ox, a horse, and so on. But these aren't just different individuals, they're actually different classes of animals. So think of it this way, just to make a very simple illustration. I think you probably already are getting this, but let's just make it even clearer. Let's say we have 3 dogs, Rover, Spot, and Fido, right? 3 dogs. They differ in number. Each is 1. But they're the same in species. They're all dogs. If you have a dog, a cat, and a horse, they differ in species, but they all belong to the same genus. They're all animals. So you can understand the difference between individuals, species, and genera. So think of how genus and species differ. Genus can name things that belong to different species, but species names things that belong to only one class and differ only in that they're individuals. All right? So you should be able to identify how genus and species are similar, they're both predicated of many things, and how they're different. He then moves on to the next comparison. He says, genus differs from peculiarity in this. So here's the second or even third comparison. Peculiarity is predicated of many things, like genus. That's what they have in common. But peculiarity is predicated of only one species. Genus is predicated of multiple species. Peculiarity is a predicate that refers to only one species. A peculiarity, and in some English translations you'll see property, they mean the same thing. A peculiarity belongs to only one species. It's literally a characteristic that is true of only one species. I gave an example before of a human being is the only species that is able to laugh. A dog, the only species that's able to bark, for example. A peculiarity belongs to one species and belongs to all of the individuals in that species. Able to laugh belongs only to man, and it belongs to all men. A genus, like animal, is not limited to one species. It applies to many different species. So we see how genus and peculiarity are similar and how they're different. You should be able to identify both. Going on, he says, farther still, genus differs from difference and from accidents which are common. Genus differs from difference and from accidents which are common. Now this is a very important distinction that students often find confusing. Differences and accidents can be predicated of many things. So they're like genus, like species, like peculiarity. But they can be said about different species, so they're not like peculiarities. They can be spoken of different species just like genera can. For example, rational is a difference. It can be predicated about humans, but also about angels. We can refer to either of those species as rational. Rational, again, is a difference. It can be said about only one species, rational animals, and it can be said of all of the members of that species. An accident is different from a difference, and an example of an accident would be black. We could say that crows are black. That's true of crows, not true of all birds, and I think it's true of all crows. We could also say coal is black, so it can be said of a different species. Night is black, again, a different species. So we can see that a difference can be said about many different species, just like genera can. It can be said about humans and angels. Black also can be said about different species, about crows, about coal, which is a kind of stone or earth, and about night. But here's the key difference. When someone asks, what is this? What is this? Think about that question. What is this? We answer with genus. Genus answers with respect to the essence of a thing. It answers the question, what is this? But when someone asks, what kind of thing is this? What kind of thing is this? We answer with a difference or with an accident. So we see the differences in the questions that these different predicables answer. We see how genus, difference, and accident are alike. They can all be predicated of different species. But we see how they differ. Genus answers the question, what is this? Difference and accident answer the question, what kind of thing is this? That's the difference. So if someone points to a man and asks, what is this? We say, this is an animal. We name the genus. If they say, what kind of thing is this man? What kind of thing is this man? We could say he is rational. We can predicate the difference. Or we can say he is tall. We can predicate an accident. We could say he is sitting. He is hot. He is white. And so on. All accidents. This distinction shows us that genus identifies the fundamental nature or the essence of something. The differences and accidents tell us about qualities or characteristics of things. So again, work to make sure you can identify how these things are similar, what they have in common, and how they're different. That's the goal in this section. And I actually have a handout that has a table on it that shows all of these similarities and differences. It should be on the course page in Classical Reasoning 1. If you don't see it, let me know, and I'll give you a copy. Let's keep moving here. The above-mentioned description, Porphyry says, of the conception of genus contains nothing superfluous, nothing deficient. That means we've said everything that needs to be said about genus. It contains nothing superfluous, nothing extra, and nothing deficient. We haven't left anything out. So Porphyry concludes that his definition for genus is complete and precise. Every part of the definition is necessary, and nothing that's important has been left out. And so that brings us to the end of the second part, and that's the end of the discussion about genus. In part 3, he moves on to do the same thing he just did for genus, but to do it for species. So now we're going to study the meanings and definition of species here in part 3. This begins where we read, species, however, is predicated indeed of every form. So just like genus, the word species has different meanings. In everyday language, species can mean any kind of form or appearance, the species of a thing. That's one meaning of the term species. He says that is also called species, which is placed under the genus that we've already explained. So here's another meaning of species. It's something placed under genus according to its philosophical definition. In philosophy, species means something that falls under or within a genus. Man is a species of the genus animal. White is a species of the genus color. Triangle is a species of the genus figure. We see that species are placed under or within a genus. They unfold, therefore, Porphyry says, the meaning of species as follows. Species is that which is arranged under genus. We've already said this, but he's sort of drilling down and getting into more detail little by little. Species is that which is arranged under genus. He's given us two definitions of species. First, species is that which is arranged under genus, and of which genus is predicated in answer to the question, what is this thing? This means that when we ask what a species is, we answer with its genus. What is man? Man is an animal. And second, he said, species is that which is predicated of many things differing in number in answer to the question, what is this? This means that species can be said about many individuals. What is Socrates? Well, Socrates is a man. What is Plato? Plato is a man. Now, what we see here is that he's actually identifying two different kinds of species, and this can be a little confusing. There's two different kinds of species. Think about what he said. Species is that which is arranged under genus, of which genus is predicated in answer to the question, what is this thing? What is man? Man is an animal. That's one kind of species. But there's another. Species is that which is predicated of many things differing in number, that is, individuals. So one use of species can refer to things which contain species in themselves. That may be a little confusing. Species can be used anytime we talk about a group within a genus. Anytime we talk about a group within a genus, we can call it a species. However, most properly speaking, a species is a group within a genus which contains only individuals. And this is a cause of some confusion here. And you really need to chew on this to make sure you can picture what we mean. And I'll try to clarify it for you. And we're going to get into this in detail, just so you know. But just to help you understand this at the beginning. Anytime we talk of a genus, it can divide into species. Sometimes each of those species can act like a genus and divide into other species, and this can go on and on. We can have this long and complex division from a genus into species, and then those species into other species, and each of those species into smaller species until we get all the way down to the bottom, and we've just got individuals left, no more groups. So species can refer to the very bottom-most final groups, where a genus divides into species and does not divide any more into species, but only into individuals. That last species is called the most special species. And remember, special refers to species. So it's the most proper species. So the last species in this tree of the division of things, of classes and subclasses, all the way down to individuals. The last class is species in the most proper sense. But anytime a genus can divide into subclasses, those subclasses are called species, even though those species can turn around and act like a genus for other classes contained within them. So two different kinds of species here, and we're going to talk about this in the next section. Porphyry notes that the second definition only works for what we call most special species, the lowest level of species that cannot be divided into more species. Man is an example of most special species because we can't divide man into further or smaller species. We can only divide man into individuals. That prepares us for part 4 of chapter 2. We're going to look now at the hierarchy of genera and species. Now, before we get into this fourth part, I'd like to say that if you're interested in checking something out real quick, go on Google or a search engine and search for the tree of Porphyry, T-R-E-E, tree, the tree of Porphyry, and look at images, and you'll see a bunch of images from either medieval or old modern books that has an illustration of a tree with all different categories on the tree. That hierarchy that's illustrated in that image called the tree of Porphyry, if you look on the Classical Liberal Arts Academy website, you'll see I actually show the image of the tree of Porphyry and give a detailed explanation of what that image shows. So you might want to look for that. But what we're talking about here in part 4 of chapter 2, the hierarchy of genera and species, is what you see in that picture of the tree of Porphyry. So keep that in mind, all right? Let's look at what Porphyry has to say in our text. In each category, there are certain things which are most general. That is, they're the highest level of genus, most general. And again, on the bottom of the tree, there are things which are most special. Special, again, refers to species. In each category, there are things which are most general and things which are most special. Here, Porphyry is explaining one of the most important concepts in logic. This is why this study is so important. If you can understand this teaching about the hierarchy of genera and species, all of classical reasoning will come into focus for you. It'll be very easy to understand. This is the hierarchy of genera and species. At the very top of this hierarchy, we have the most general genus, the broadest category that contains all of the species underneath it. The highest category of things. At the bottom of the hierarchy, we've got individuals, obviously, but we've got the most special species, the most specific category that cannot be divided into smaller categories or species, but only into individuals. Between these extremes, so the most general genus at the top of the hierarchy and the most special species at the bottom of the hierarchy, between those two extremes, we have what are called subaltern genera and species, because in between those extremes, the most general genus and the most special species, each class in between can be both a genus and a species. The most general genus is only a genus. It's not a species of any higher class. The most special species is only a species. It does not serve as a genus of any other species. But all of the classes in between those two extremes, in between the most general genus at the top and the most special species at the bottom, every one of them can be a genus with respect to classes within it, and a species with respect to a genus above it. They're called subaltern genera and species, things that are both genus and species, depending on what we compare them to. What has been said, Porphyry goes on to say, will become evident if we look at one category. So let's just take one category, essence or substance. Essence is itself a genus. And Porphyry here gives us an example so we can see the whole hierarchy worked out with respect to one category, essence. He starts at the top and says essence is the most general genus. Essence can divide. It can divide into a body, for example, a corporeal essence. Body can divide into an animated body. So now body is a species of essence, but is a genus that contains animated body. Animated body can divide into animal. So animated body is a species of body, but the genus of animal. Animal can divide into rational animal. So animal is a species of animated body, but is the genus of rational animal. Rational animal can divide into man. Rational animal is a species of animal, but is the genus of man. And then man divides only into individuals, Socrates, Plato, and so on. So man is the most special species. There's no species under man in the hierarchy. So here you have an example which you really need to make sure you study, and you can see this is what's illustrated on the tree of Porphyry. This example of a hierarchy, an example of one category of substance. Essence, the most general genus at the top, divides into body, which is both a species and a genus. It divides into animated body and so on, all the way down to man, which is the most special or the last species, and then man contains only individuals. This creates the hierarchy of genera and species. Each level going downward is more specific than the one above it, but more general than the one below it. And remember, the most general genus at the top is only genus. The most special species at the bottom is only species. All of the things in between, essence and man, are subaltern genera and species. They can serve as both genera and species. That's the hierarchy of genera and species. Very, very important concept in philosophy. Porphyry goes on to say, hence these have two habitudes, one to things prior to them and one to things following them. The word habitude means a relationship or a way of relating to something else. So each of these subaltern genera and species have two different relationships, one to the genus above and one to the species below. In other words, they're species when we look up the ladder, and they're genera when we look down the ladder or down the hierarchy. But the extremes, Porphyry says, the most general genus at the top and the most special species at the bottom, they have only one habitude or relation. The most general genus only looks down. It doesn't look up to a higher genus. It looks down to species. And the most special species only looks up. It has a genus, but it has no species underneath it. So the extremes have only one relation to other things, whereas the subaltern genera and species have two relations to other things. In genealogies, They refer for the most part to one principle, Porphyry says. And here Porphyry is making an important distinction for us. In family trees or genealogies, everything goes back to one ancestor, like Jupiter, if we think about classical mythology. But in logical categories, there's not one highest genus for everything. Aristotle identified 10 highest categories, and this is where the categories come from: substance, quantity, quality, relation, place, time, position, state, action, and passion. These are called the 10 categories. Substance, the first one I just named, is the same thing as essence, which we just looked at. So you can see how important is this study for an understanding of Aristotle's categories. The categories really are nothing other than most general genera. And Aristotle says there are only 10 of them. There are only 10 things that can be considered most general genera. Again, the names are substance, quantity, quality, relation, place, time, position, state, action, and passion. We'll study those in detail in the categories after we finish Porphyry's introduction. So you can see how this is preparing us to study Aristotle's categories with understanding. If we called everything being, if we tried to imagine that there was one super most general genus into which all other things could be contained, we would be using the word in different senses, which, again, Aristotle is going to talk about this in the categories, and not in the same sense, which is, our goal in philosophy. So Aristotle, or Porphyry here, is pointing out the problem in trying to identify one most general genus. He says that can't be done. Aristotle identifies 10, and beyond this, there is no greater genus. So this preserves the distinctness of the different categories of reality, which is the subject of Aristotle's categories. So we're getting there, little by little. We're starting to understand the concepts that are necessary for us to understand Aristotle's categories. Let's move on to the fifth part of the lesson, the logic of predication. What does it mean to predicate something of a subject? I talked about it a little bit before, but now Porphyry gets into this in more detail. The logic of predication, as I said. He says, with respect to genus and species, having explained what each of them is, so having gone through the definitions of the first two predicables, we're now going to move on and talk about how they relate to each other in reasoning. He says, genus is always predicated of species. This is very, very important. This is how reasoning works. Genus is predicated of species. So if we start with a species like man, and we ask, what is this? We answer the question, we predicate of species a genus. Genus is always predicated of species. Man is an animal. Animal, a genus, is predicated of man. Superior classes, that is, are predicated of the inferior or lower classes in this hierarchy of genus and species. This creates for us a fundamental rule in thinking and speaking. We can always predicate a higher term of a lower term. Why? Because the lower terms are contained in the higher terms. So the higher term is always true of the lower terms. We can always predicate that which is superior in the hierarchy of that which is inferior. But we can't go in the other direction. We can't predicate something higher, or something lower, I should say, of something higher. That's a logical fallacy. That's an invalid argument. For example, if I were to say, man is an animal, I'm predicating a genus of a species. That's true. Man is an animal. But if I said, oh, that's an animal, therefore it's man, that would be false. You can't predicate an inferior of a superior. That would not be true. Just because man is a kind of animal doesn't mean that if you see an animal, it must be a man. That's pretty obvious. But you can see the relationship between genus and species is what makes that true or false. It's like a one-way street in reasoning. Predication flows from general to specific. It doesn't flow from specific to general. We predicate genera of species. We don't predicate species of genera. This is the logic of predication. Individuals, such as Socrates or this white substance, this particular thing, like I'm pointing to some individual thing saying this white substance. An individual can't be predicated of anything. Individuals are completely unique combinations of characteristics. Socrates has a collection of properties that no other person can have in exactly the same way. So there's nothing that you can point to and predicate that this is Socrates unless you are literally pointing at Socrates and asking, what is this? There's nothing else that you would answer with it's Socrates. You would never answer or predicate an individual thing of anything other than the individual himself. The species man, however, contains characteristics that can belong to many different individuals. So we can predicate man of many different individuals, but we can't predicate an individual of any species. Hence, Porphyry says the individual is contained by species, and the species is contained by genus. Now, it's important to get this image in your head, because really, reasoning becomes an illustration. The use of the word containers is very, very important. When he said the individual is contained by species, species is contained by genus. We can predicate the container of anything that's contained in it. We can predicate the container of anything that's contained in it. And this is really all that logic has to deal with. What we're going to see as we study syllogisms in prior analytics, we're going to see that it's really just understanding this relationship between things as things that are containers and things that are contained within containers. That's really all we need to understand to reason rightly. We need to imagine this system of many different containers and things within containers, containers and classes within containers and classes within smaller containers, and that continues down to individuals in the smallest containers. When we have the image, when we have things divided into all of these containers rightly, we can very easily make valid logical conclusions about those things by simply speaking of them with respect to their containers. And I know that that may be a little abstract and difficult to understand, but when we get to analytics in classical reasoning 2, having studied this first, you're going to see just how clear and easy it is to think logically when you learn to think in terms of this hierarchy of genera and species in all of the 10 categories, and of this logic of predication that we're talking about here in Porphyry's introduction. So finally, coming to the end of the chapter, Porphyry says, concerning genus and species, therefore, we have shown what they are. He has accomplished his purpose. He concludes by summarizing that he's done what he set out to do. We now understand, and I think you should agree if you've paid attention carefully, we understand what genus and species are. We understand how they relate to each other. We understand what the most general genus is. We understand what the most special species is. We understand what individuals are. We understand what subaltern genera and species are. And we understand the different ways that these terms can be used. That's the goal of Chapter 2. So a difficult chapter, lots of information, but again, this is just the lecture. By the time you've studied this and gone back through the lesson and completed the assessments, I think you can look back and say that this is complicated to look at first, but easy to understand once you've gone through it and start to get this system of ideas sorted out in your head. I promised before that before I finish, I would give you some memory work to help clarify these things. So let me give you 10 points for memory work, which I've jotted down. 10 points that are worth memorizing to walk away from this and keep hold of the key points. 10 of them. Number 1, genus has 3 meanings: family lineage, place of origin, and philosophical category. Genus has 3 meanings. The third one, remember, is the one that we're interested in. Number 2, philosophical genus is predicated of many things, differing in species, in answer to the question, what is it? Philosophical genus, the meaning that we're interested in, is predicated of many things, differing in species, in answer to the question, what is it? Number 3, species is predicated of many things, differing in number, in answer to the question, what is it? And that refers to most special species. Species is predicated of many things, differing in number, in answer to what is it? Number 4, genus differs from species because genus applies to different kinds. Species applies to different individuals of the same kind. Genus differs from species because genus applies to different kinds, but species applies to different individuals of the same kind. Number 5, the most general genus in the hierarchy of genus and species, the most general genus has no genus above it. Number 6, the most special species has no species below it, only individuals. Number 7, subaltern genera and species are both genus and species relative to different things. Subaltern genera and species are both genus and species relative to different things. Number 8, higher terms can be predicated of lower terms in this hierarchy, but not vice versa. Higher terms can be predicated of lower terms, but not vice versa. That's the logic of predication. Number 9, individuals are unique combinations of characteristics that cannot belong to another. Individuals are unique combinations of characteristics that cannot belong to another. And lastly, number 10, the hierarchy moves from most general at the top to most special at the bottom. Genus contains species, species contain individuals. Those are our 10 points for memorization for this lesson. So in this lecture, we've studied now Chapter 2 of Porphyry's Introduction. We've discussed the 3 different meanings of genus, the philosophical definitions of both genus and species, the hierarchy from the most general to the most special, the rules of predication, and the nature of individuals. So now, having gone through all that, it's time for you to reread and study the lesson for yourself, working to develop your understanding of the lesson, every sentence in the lesson, and to demonstrate your understanding using the graded assessments that are provided in the course, in our classical reasoning course, that is. If you have any questions or need any help, if there's anything you find in the chapter that you feel wasn't explained or still isn't clear, visit the Academy Help Center at classicalliberalaarts.com/support. You can find answers to other questions there, share posts on the community forums, or submit a ticket to ask a private question. Once again, my name is William Michael. I'm the headmaster of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and I hope that this lesson has been helpful. God bless your studies.